this is all documented, it's very easy to find. 1 million came from Europe, 5.5 million came from Africa. So that means during the 300 years of the 500 years of the modern Americas, almost everybody was African. So how are you going to tell the story of the Americas and leave out the majority of the people? I mean, that's like thinking you're going to talk about the African diaspora and not understand that you have to talk about the Afro-Brazilians, who are at least twice as numerous as we are, and whose flagrant African culture is so much more apparent than ours. It was a result of hanging out in Brazil that I began to be able to see the Africanity of U.S. African-American culture. You know, those people getting happy in church. Well, where's that from? Not Europe.
Vivian. So, Kiana, as far as plagiarism and what in your family, what you've seen, and you know that is a heritage that comes from your background, but it's not recognized. Could you contribute any thoughts on that?
I could actually. So as I said earlier, we're gonna have a punta night. So punta is a Garifuna traditional dance. So I think around the 90s, there was a group in Honduras making punta music. So basically they took away our beats and were making music, but they weren't using it, but basically plagiarized it. So they were supposedly playing punta music, but they were not doing it the way the Garifunas do it. It's a ritual dance. There's a reason behind that. And when we sing punta, we sing it in Garifuna. They weren't singing it in Garifuna. They were singing it in Spanish, and they were using it. The girls that would dance were wearing very provocative clothes, and that was offensive to the older generations of Garifunas because they knew the history behind the music. It's quite offensive to me also whenever I meet a Afro or a Latino that's like, oh, you dance punta. Once I tell them Honduras, I'm like, yes. So their little name, oh, baila sopa de caracol. And I'm like, that's not really punta. Don't ask me that. So that's actually one of the main songs that a lot of Latinos know about, which is to them punta. But when I hear punta, I think about Aurelio Martinez, Africa. I think of John Palacio band, the Garifuna collection, not Los Silver Star band or whatever the non-Garifunas that decided to play punta music in the 90s. That's not what I consider.
So it was Europeanized?
It was the non-Garifunas playing punta music, and yeah.
And so no recognition
was made for it, or like even in the club, like if you go to like a Latino club, they'll probably play punta, but it won't be the actual like Garifuna punta. It will be like the song I just mentioned, Sopa de Caracol. So yeah.
So I've heard it in this era of Donald Trump, the war of ideas is bigger than ever before, right? The idea that our news media is not something we can rely on. We can't rely on what we see on our Facebook. The war of ideas. And what I hear from our guests is that the Americas have been Africanized more than we realize, and that has been hidden, and the idea of that has been controlled by those who control the media and control what's taught in school and what perspective one approaches history. So I'm going to read just one line from Dr. Sheila Walker's book that is on this subject. Dr. Sheila Walker, she edited this book called African Roots and American Cultures. It's just one simple line. She says, by offering new data, interpretations, and theories, this volume explicitly challenges the conceptualization of the Americas as being a European construct and construction, and then now I would add, rather than an Africanized country and construction. So, could you give a comment or further on that? And I understand this is a book that was produced as a result of a conference, if you want to mention about that, and the importance of getting out of our comfort zone and traveling in order to understand the world a little better.
Yeah, I lived outside of my comfort zone, or I have developed a huge comfort zone, which I encourage you to do. Yeah, I had a conference in the 90s. I directed the Center for African and African American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and I got some money to organize a conference, and the issue was, what was the role of Africans in creating the modern world? And the issue is that Africans and African descendants, enslaved perhaps, had a huge role in creating the modern world. First of all, there would have been no industrial revolution if there had not been a huge unpaid labor force in the Americas that grew the cotton that allowed Britain to have a textile industry. Sugar, sugar, that horrible thing, sugar. The sugar industry, what was that based on? The labor of enslaved Africans. Which makes me think about roles of women. And African descendant women, and thinking about talking about Afro-Latin women, I want to say, this is off the topic, this is not related to exactly what I was going to say, but I wanted to say something about kinds of roles that Afro-Latin women are playing today. And of course there is sexism, of course there is racism, every place in the Americas. It has slightly different nuances in some places. The United States is wonderful because it's clear, you know, one drop. If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. You're brown, stick around. You're black, you're back. We know that, right? So we don't have to worry. We don't have to have a lot of mythologizing. Brazil had the opposite kind of worldview, because if they had had the one-drop rule, then it wouldn't be in 2010 that Brazil said, oh, okay, we are the first African country in the Americas. Brazil has more African descendants than all the countries in the world except for Nigeria. Right? And that's the Brazilian government that says that, okay, not me. So, in spite of racism, sexism, and all of the above, if you take a country like Ecuador, that one may think of as a Native American country where there are lots of African descendants, there is a national organization of black women, for example, Ecuador. In Colombia, the Vice Minister of Culture is an Afro-Colombian. The Vice Minister of the Interior is an Afro-Colombian. Women, I'm talking about. The previous Secretary of Minister of Culture was a woman. In Peru, the Minister of Culture was, a couple of administrations ago, an Afro-Peruvian woman who's actually a wonderful singer who got a Grammy, Susana Baca. In Brazil, the mayor of Rio was an Afro-Brazilian woman, Benedita da Silva, who went on to become a senator. After the Durban conference, that was the United Nations Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia, and various forms of discrimination, Brazil created a special secretariat for integration of populations that had been excluded. And the heads of that department in the executive branch of the government were, I think there was a man for a short time, but the others were Afro-Brazilian women. So, in spite of, and Costa Rica, who thinks of Afro-Costa Ricans? Well, an Afro-Costa Rican woman ran for vice president, Epsi Campbell. So, in spite of all of the racism, sexism, Afro-Latin women have done wonderful things. And that's off the topic, but I did have to say that. And I want to say a little something about how you can know more about this. There's a great book called Women Warriors of the Afro-Latina Diaspora, edited by Marta Moreno Vega, who's a New Yorican, Maria Nieves Alba, I don't know where she's from, and Yvette Modestin, who is an Afro-Panamanian. So that's a great book. I also, I think it's important to know how you can know stuff. So, that book I edited is based on this conference that I organized, and the conference was an unusual academic conference in that it also included people who are not academics. I called an Afro-Uruguayan, for example, Tomás Oliveira Chirimini, and said, I want to invite you to a conference at the university where I teach. And he said, oh, I'd love to come, but I didn't go to a university. How can I speak in a university? And I said, well, you have two choices. Okay, you can come and represent yourself, Or you can tell me the name of the non-Afro-Uruguayan anthropologist to whom you told your story, who has written a book about you maybe and made his or her career on your back, on the back of your community. So he decided he'd rather come and represent himself. So I invited several Afro-Latinos who were not university graduates, because that's a privilege that they didn't have. So they came, they represented themselves quite well. I did a documentary just to show they really exist. It's called Scattered Africa, Faces and Voices of the African Diaspora. And Lucia Molina from Argentina starts by saying, no existimos. I think she read Encyclopedia Britannica that says that she doesn't exist. It says that the Afro-Uruguayans I invited don't exist. It suggests that my friend from Bolivia, Juan Angola Maconde, when I met him, he said, I'm Juan Angola Maconde de Bolivia, no tenemos cultura africana, we have no African culture. And I said, you invented the name Angola Maconde? Bolivia, oh, okay, there's no country without African descendants. So I felt a little bad about not having been able to invite all of them to the conference that was the source of this book, African Roots, American Cultures, Africa and the Creation of the Americas. So I taught at Spelman for a while and got some money to do a project with Afro-Latinos and with a colleague from Venezuela who was here not so long ago, Ambassador Chucho Garcia. We got together leaders from Spanish-speaking countries in South America. We excluded Central America because it's a different reality from South America, and it would have just been much too complex. We also excluded Brazil for just being too big and having too much stuff. We wanted to be able to talk about Bolivia. We wanted to be able to talk about Paraguay. Neither one, I mean, the African population in none of those countries would even make a good favela in Brazil. And there's so much written about Brazil already. So we invited people from the 9 Spanish-speaking countries in South America to come together to talk about their culture. And we gave them the basic themes. We know the themes about, resistance, spirituality. It's pretty obvious. And although they were not academics, they had not all gone to college at all, we got a book out of this situation. It's called Conocimiento desde adentro, los afro-suramericanos hablan de sus pueblos y sus historias. Knowledge from the inside. Afro-South Americans speak of their people and their histories. And for a group of non-academics to do such a book was pretty amazing. It was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. I had 1 year of Spanish, y'all. And here I am editing a book that these people have written in Spanish and saying, excuse me, you need to add accents to these words. Well, they ignored me, so I got great at adding accents. Accenting in Spanish is very logical. But it became a major project in that I asked these folks for 20 pages. Juan Angola Maconde got so excited about having the first opportunity ever to research and talk about his own people, he wrote 70 pages. Now what can I say? Well, great. And then he went on to, okay, well, I'm in this book, then let me just write my own. As did Marta Salgado Hernandez from Chile. She wrote her own book thereafter. So, an Afro-Bolivian, who according to Encyclopedia Britannica doesn't exist, an Afro-Chilean, who according to Encyclopedia Britannica, and I'm talking about Britannica Online today, I'm not talking about those hardcover books. No, I'm talking, okay, neither one of these people exists yet. Both of them have written books about their cultures. So there's information available. And for me, it was as a result of hanging out elsewhere in the African diaspora that I was able to understand U.S. African American culture and to redefine myself as not just a U.S. citizen. That's really limiting. My self-definition now is that I'm from the African diaspora with a U.S. passport as a result of an accident of a slave ship. Knowing the demographics of Africans who came to the Americas, 45% were taken to Brazil. It's logical. Tropical, right? 5% came to British North America. So it would be easier to be Brazilian than to be North American.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. So interesting. So the idea here is, among many ideas that I'm getting from both of you, is for us to realize that we have our own story and it has value, and we have something to say and contribute to the world, definitely, especially as women.